Now, topic number 3, we wanted to talk about UBI, Universal Basic Income, is a concept that's been bandied around a lot in the US. I would say it's quite popular in Silicon Valley as a concept. The idea is that the government gives people a basic minimum wage, basically for free, to set a kind of floor in the economy and to make sure that people have their basic needs met. And it's often cited as a response or an answer to, hey, what happens when AI takes all our jobs? And so Sam Altman, who obviously is CEO of OpenAI, but I think really early in OpenAI's life, he funded or raised money for a UBI study, a study into how universal basic income actually affects people when implemented. The study has now come back. It's actually quite a long-term study over 3 years. And the results are in, and here are some of the key takeaways. Thanks to Morning Brew here on Twitter, he did a thread. I'm going to read out some of the key posts. He gave low-income people $1,000 a month for 3 years, no strings attached. Back in 2019, 3,000 Texas and Illinois residents were enrolled in this guaranteed basic income study. It was funded by Sam Altman, who raised $60 million for the study, $40 million of which was his own money. And all participants below $28,000 were given $1,000 a month for 3 years, while members of a control group were given $50 a month. For those who received $1,000 a month, overall spending increased by $310 a month. Most of that money went towards food, transportation, and rent. There was also an increase in offering financial support to others. However, those residents didn't necessarily experience improvements across the board. There was no direct evidence of improved access to healthcare or improvements to physical or mental well-being.
So did it work or didn't it?
Well, it's sort of a it depends answer, right?
Mixed bag, like everything in life.
Right, exactly. There was an increase in life satisfaction, but it didn't last. And there's a quote here: cash alone cannot address challenges such as chronic health conditions, lack of healthcare and childcare, and high cost of housing. But there was certainly some benefits that can't be avoided. So the answer, Emil, to your question is it helped in some ways. It didn't help for everything.
So yes or no, if I force you to say, did it work or not in Chris, Ben, and Yaniv's opinion, yes or no?
It feels like it works somewhat.
No.
Enough
Yes
to
or
be
no.
interesting.
Yes or no?
Yes. And look, yes, enough to do more experimentation, because we don't actually know the true answer to, would this work? And is this a potentially better system? I would argue that we have lots of flaws with the existing system overall that obviously need to be addressed. You know, we can talk about income inequality, all that sort of thing. I like the idea at the high level of a cash stipend where you as the person have a choice on how you spend it. There would almost certainly in a US system be some restrictions, like it probably if you're a convict or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but to me, at least, clearly, it sounds like it reduced some level of stress. $1,000 a month or whatever number is not going to change the fact that you could buy or not buy a house in a short period of time. Over a long period of time, it might. I would see the first version of that as successful.
Well, interestingly here's one of the key findings, is those who were receiving the $1,000 a month, their average incomes rose from $30,000 to $45,700.
Whoa.
And when asked why, they said the cash offered flexibility that may increase agency to make employment decisions that are better aligned with the individual's circumstances, goals, and values. But I want to push back on your question, Emil, this kind of black and white, did it work or didn't it work? Because
we're a show. We're trying to be provocative.
Okay. But, it reminds...
He's trying to push back on you.
It reminds me of this whole product management academic philosophy of run an experiment and see if it worked. And did it work or didn't it work? And if it worked, then you roll it out. And it's kind of like this binary state of these experiments run in a vacuum. And I'm always a proponent when I come in to lead product to say, hey guys, stop experimenting your way to every damn thing. Many things are part of a system, and systems work as part of a cohesive whole. And this thing may not work in a vacuum, but it's these 3 things together improve the overall system and the quality of the system. And I think US politics and US governance is all too often, far too often about hey, let's try this random thing and let's have this random argument. Let's talk about this thing, each of them in a vacuum. But I think the problem with US governance and politics is that all too few times people step back and go, hey, it's a system. If mental health goes up and gun availability goes up and healthcare goes down, then you'll have more shootings and you'll have how about we address the 17 things that all contribute to the systemic problem? And so is UBI a panacea? Is it in a vacuum the answer to all the ills? No. Is it part of a mix of possible tools in a belt to solve a systemic problem that will become only worse? Possibly. And I think it needs to be thought of as a tool.
So I want to go in a slightly different direction with this, which is like I'm less interested in the exact outcomes of this study than in the fact that Sam Altman is so interested in UBI. What?
No,
No,
that's a great observation.
no, it's good. You're right. It is hilarious.
It's a good insight.
He's been
That's why we're laughing.
Well,
Yeah,
no, I think
keep
because I think
going.
it says something about his philosophy, or his not even his philosophy, his view of the future, right? Which is that AI is going to take away people's jobs. And one of the things about capitalism, and one of the things that makes it work really well, is you've got this nexus between capital and labor, right? That no matter what your politics, what makes capitalism work is that you have both, right? And that labor is required and capital is required, and they go well together. And what AI is threatening to do, and I think what Sam Altman is implicitly saying he believes as a result of his interest here, is that it starts to break that link between capital and labor, right? Because now the capital can achieve so much on its own. You don't need to hire people, you just need to hire GPUs, right? And so that breaks capitalism, actually. Again, no matter your philosophy, because if people have no way of earning money, then they have no way of spending money, then that whole economic transfer doesn't work. And so you're like, what can fill the gap if people are no longer needed for most of the productive work in a society? And, UBI is in a sense kind of like nearly the most obvious dumb answer to that. So
Yeah, it's like a brute force, like here's money
it's brute
then.
force. That's right. It's like, oh, okay, if people don't have any money anymore because they can't get jobs because their skills are not needed, let's give them money, right? And I guess it's interesting to see how that works. And this is far from the first study on UBI and similar schemes, by the way. And again, previous studies have, I would say, provided a mixed bag of results. But it's nearly a question of like, okay, if you have large levels of unemployment, this might be the only way of keeping the economy functioning. And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking.
We've discussed this before, guys, right? Which is, what are the disruption curves? Meaning, like, if 1 billion people get unemployed in the space of 2 years, that's a problem. So that's a global problem. Like, it'll fisher societies. But if it's like every other technology trend where there's like a short disruption cycle, like, yes, the auto manufacturing industry kind of crashed when the Japanese started to perfect their cars, and then we had to like reinvent it, and but it wasn't a global phenomenon. It was sort of concentrated in small pockets. We don't exactly know yet. We can say call center agents are quickly going to get disrupted. So let's use that as the example of what do you do with those people who lost their jobs, which was a low skilled job that were getting paid a living wage. Right now, there's other opportunities for that type of worker in most of the global economy, which is good. So you're projecting a world where that doesn't happen. The problem with UBI that I have, and why I say it doesn't work to solve the problem writ large, is because, and this is where I'm going to get fuzzy on you guys, which is it doesn't nourish the soul very much. It, like, to the extent you believe the depression problem we have in this country, mental health and all these things, are lack of connections with family because people live farther apart now, not in a dense family environment, and they don't have meaning in their work. This doesn't help either of those things. And that trend seems to be happening irrespective of AI, where people are getting unhappy, less connectivity, less work happiness, like even remote work's, adding to that problem.
Emil, you make logical points, but I do disagree with you. I think that was interesting what Chris said on the study showed like people's incomes increase. Part of that probably is because they changed jobs to something they maybe wanted to go and do more. And so I think on the surface, it doesn't go and nourish, and people need to have purpose to like feel good and all that. I would argue that there's a chance, we don't know, we don't have enough data, but there's a real chance that that extra income would lead to certain things like being able to find the job you actually want to find and feeling more purpose.
But that very example means that there are other jobs to find. So it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Well, no, but the problem is, like, if you're worried about the baseline of your life, you're a single mother of 2, and you're just like, I can't like afford to go and like search for things and be out of a job for a little bit while I search for a new job that better fits. With UBI, you could theoretically, okay, I can at least do the baseline. I will find something that works better, because you're not going to live off that alone. No UBI proposal is like it's enough to go and live off of forever.
But
like a little baseline.
hold on. What's the difference between that and food stamps? That
Everybody
and welfare,
gets it.
That
Well,
and the other.
The difference, what I like about it, the difference is that everybody gets it, and you as the consumer get choice, and you don't have to have all these like programs with all those kinds of restrictions. Like, look, it's this. You might not even have to deal with Social Security in the more extreme version. It's like, look, this is it. You screw this up on your own. That's your fault. If you're able to go and do something, that's like you. There is a libertarian aspect that it's like to the UBI kind of conversation where you go and like have the choice. And so I like it from that
No, no, okay,
perspective. And I like the fact,
just because it's fun to talk about this, and maybe our watchers will enjoy this. But okay, so we have welfare for the very poor, or government assistance programs for the very poor. The rich don't need it. The upper middle class don't need it. So you're really talking about a sliver of people who could use the extra money to be more free in their lives. So it's not universal basic income, it's narrow basic income. It's assisting a category of people who would make a difference for, because poor people have it.
I think we're conflating a few different things here, right? There is how do you lift the floor on society in general and deal with poverty and helping those people out? And then there is how do you deal with a post-labor economy? And those are like different things, right?
And there's actually one other thing, Chris. There's actually one other argument for UBI, which is actually just what you were getting at, Emil, which is a massive reduction in government administration and bureaucracy. So for folks who don't like regulation, there's actually that angle on it too, which is like, instead of having these very complicated welfare systems, we just simplify. We're like, everybody gets the same amount and we can cut huge amounts of bureaucracy.
But that's like a flat tax, man. Like,
it's a reverse
at
flat
the bottom
tax.
end of the scale, the people need more than that.
It is a negative flat tax.
Yeah, but let's talk about this in the context of solving the problem of labor implosion, right? So the first is, I agree with you that just handing money out doesn't address the problem of nourishing the soul. That is right. It's just plain on the face of it. People need a purpose, right? But I also think handing cash out, as we've just already alluded to, is a kind of like brute force kind of patch on the system. And ultimately what we need to try to figure out, if we believe that there is a post-labor economy, that we need to find some kind of post-scarcity civilization, right? Like, what does it look like when people can pursue their dreams and their passions and their interests? You know, again, I'm moving forward into like Star Trek territory here, which is like, how do you find people a role in society and resource them for those roles that is not connected to money and reward and all this kind of stuff, if in fact that's true? The last point I just want to make quickly is, Emil, the thing I'm most pushing back on with what you're saying is twofold. One is you're saying it's likely to roll out like every other change and disruption where we will just absorb it in the economy. And I'm saying if any cycle is likely to not be that, it's this one. Because there are accelerating exponentials.
So I don't just say, I'm not saying it will. I'm saying
yes,
historically that's been true, but yes, this feels different. So therefore, then you're like, okay, if this is going to cause massive disruption, that's going to be a dislocation like we haven't seen before in terms of the how the slope works. Then you're talking about people not being able to pursue their passions. You're like trying to give them money to live because they have no other option.
Yes.
And that is not a universal basic income scheme. That is like a rescue scheme in a way.
Yeah. So I mean, I do think that AI has the potential to disrupt society's ability to absorb disruption. That is a serious potential concern. But the other thing I also want to kind of push back on what you're saying a little bit is, I don't think the solution to that problem is any one thing. That's what I keep saying, right? Which is, does UBI nourish the soul? No, that's not its purpose. Its purpose is to solve the economic problem, or at least to chip away at the economic problem. And so just because it doesn't nourish the soul doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater, throw out UBI as a tool. I think we just have to find the right mix of tools, working our way to some new construction of our economy that is not rooted in just cash and commerce. Whether we want it to be like that or not, I feel like that's where it's inevitably going, because there's a whole bunch of people aren't necessary in this theoretical hypothetical future.
I have one final thought on this that maybe brings these concepts together, right? Which is that if you're a founder thinking about what are going to be growth sectors in the economy in the future, I think startups and companies that help nourish people's souls is actually a big growth area, because like you said, Emil, this stuff's already happening. It is likely to get worse. I think whether it's UBI or AI or not, like the nexus between money and happiness, to the extent it ever existed, is, or the nexus between labor and nourishing the soul, is getting weaker. And so there are other activities that are not necessarily income generating that people need to nourish their souls and live a good life. And I think there are great opportunities to help people with that. And make a shitload of money on the way.
I think you just nailed it, Yaniv. I like the way you described it. The correlation between work and your soul is getting weaker. I like that. And yeah, we've had, centuries of this. I mean, you could argue we've always been defined by the role we play in the community, right? Whether it's hunting, gathering, nurturing. And so, yeah, startups that address that problem and ideas that look at civilization from a left of center point of view or from a skewed point of view and rethink some of that. That's where the conversation is going to need to go. If in fact we'll see the kind of disruption that we're the worst case scenario.
Just give me some replicators, add a teleporter, and I'll be good.
They're in the mail, mate.
That's right. I mean, to pull this all the way back, to go to Star Trek, we need a commensurate abundance in energy and materials. And then you have Star Trek.
Any entrepreneurs who have built the replicator, please message me. I will write a check out of my fund.
Shit, I'll write you a check. I don't even have a fund, so let's do it.
That is dangerous because they could replicate your check.
If they can replicate gold, I'm definitely writing a check. And then I'm getting my money back in gold.
That's literally the money printing machine that we talk about on the EDU episodes, Yaniv.